What's up, guys? It's Tony from Streetball Strategies, where we use strategy to build your streetball legacy. Today we are talking about mindset, and we're talking about some food for thought. Today we are talking about chasing perfection. Now, what do I mean by perfection? Well, in a streetball sense, I mean having no weakness and being without flaw. Now, I know that sounds lofty and over the top, but remember, we don't have the kind of talent that the average streetball player has. We can't depend on that talent to carry us through whatever limitations and weaknesses we have. We can't depend on that talent to compensate for whatever weakness we may have that we bring to the court. And because of that, the goals that we set need to be really high. They need to be really lofty because we are shooting for average when everybody else already is average. And the reason I point this out as being a mindset is because it's not really about trying to be perfect. It's more about trying to continually get better at whatever we're trying to improve upon. The argument can be made as to why not just accept your weaknesses? Why not just accept that no matter what you do, no matter how hard you try, you're always going to have some kind of weakness, and you're not going to be able to get rid of it altogether. Well, we don't have the luxury for settling for that. That's kind of our burden to bear as not as talented players, which is whatever weaknesses we have to attack them. We can't just settle for them and accept them. We're looking for every advantage we can get, and settling for our weaknesses is not really an option for us. And so when I bring up the subject of perfection, I'm not talking about being a perfect, flawless basketball player. I'm more talking about how you attack the weaknesses that you have. If you only address those weaknesses as that you're going to try to get better with whatever it is that you're limited in, you're kind of setting yourself up for failure. Because when you tell yourself, I have this specific weakness and now I'm going to get better at it, now you allow yourself room to maybe fail and maybe not get quite as good as you possibly could. But when you tell yourself, I'm going to be perfect at this thing, I'm going to perfect this weakness so that it is no longer a weakness and thus becomes a strength, now you don't have any wiggle room. Now you have to get better. And even if there is no such thing as perfection for that particular weakness, what it does is it makes you approach it from the mindset of you're going to continually get better regardless of what your goal you're trying to achieve. So how do we do this? How do we set up this mindset to attack our weaknesses with perfection? So we have to try to be self-aware and objective when we are approaching our weaknesses. We have to be able to deconstruct them and figure out what it is about that particular weakness that you do well and what it is that makes it a weakness, the stuff that you don't do well when it comes to that limitation. An example from my own past is that I always knew I was not a good rebounder. In fact, it was probably the weakest part of my game. And I never planned to address it as being a weakness of my game. I never meant to sort of attack it because I didn't think I could overcome it. Because the reason that I wasn't a good rebounder was because of my size. I wasn't tall, I wasn't a big-bodied person, I didn't have wide shoulders, and I was an average jumper at best. In fact, as I got older and I had more wear and tear and miles on my body and my knees, I knew that I only had about 1 to 2 good jumps in me per game that I could use for a rebound. And so I knew that that was a weakness of mine, but I didn't intend to attack it to try to perfect it. But I found that addressing that problem and addressing that weakness, the best and most direct way to go about doing that is to attack it with perfection instead of just accepting it as a limitation. And so I deconstructed what I did well and what I didn't do well when it came to rebounding, And I emphasized the things that I did do well, and I tried to get rid of the things that I didn't. So my strengths when it comes to rebounding is that I'm at least averagely quick on the court. So I could use that speed and that quickness to my advantage by trying to get into rebounding position quickly. Also, I have pretty good court awareness and court vision, and I'm pretty well studied when it comes to how the ball comes off of the rim when it comes to rebounding. Meaning, because I knew that from a physical standpoint, I wasn't going to be able to box out people who are bigger or taller than me, at least not as efficiently as I would like. So I studied the geometry of rebounding. I studied where a ball was most likely to come off a rim when it was shot from certain points on the court. And I used that court awareness in conjunction with my foot speed to help me get into good rebounding position. More specifically from an offensive standpoint, when it came to offensive rebounds, because my team had the ball and because we were responsible for what shots we put up, I try to emphasize my team taking higher percentage shots so that there would be less offensive rebounds to try to chase after. Defensively, you can't really control that, at least not directly. And so defensively is where the positioning and the court awareness and being aware of how the ball comes off the rim, that's on defense, that's where that aspect of rebounding comes into play. And to try having as little rebounds as possible, I try to limit them as much as I could when it came to the offensive end. That way, the less rebounds there are, the less I have to try to fight for them. So I tried to play down my weakness of not having a good rebounding body by trying to limit the amount of rebounds as much as possible. And then to play to my strengths when it came to rebounding, I tried to use my quickness and my court awareness to get the best rebounding position possible when rebounds were unavoidable. And then from there, it was all about my mindset of trying to be perfect at those things, trying to always have the best, most perfect rebounding position, always have the most perfect court awareness and knowing who's shooting the ball, how they shoot the ball, how their rebounds come off the rim, being as aware as possible at all times of how rebounding was going to happen in that game. It was all about trying to be as perfect in a rebounding aspect as possible. Forcing myself to have the mindset that I'm going to rebound perfectly every game. Setting myself up to mentally approach the game to the point that I am continuously trying to do the very best I can and not having an end to that goal. Meaning there's no such thing as a perfectly rebounded game. What matters is that no matter what happens in the game, no matter who I'm playing against, whether I'm playing against all 7-footers, that I enter that game with the mentality that I'm going to try to rebound as perfectly as I can, while accepting the fact that perfection isn't really perfect. Perfection on the court is more about the journey and the effort of trying to be perfect than the actual event of having a perfectly rebounded game per se. Let's say I had a game where I did get every rebound that I tried to go after. In an event like that, technically that would be a perfectly rebounded game. But here's the problem with that. The problem is that there's always another game. There's always going to be future games that you're going to be playing in. And so if you do have a game where a weakness that you're trying to perfect does come to fruition, know that perfection done once can be considered a fluke. What we're trying to do is build habits here. We're trying to build a mindset system that applies to every game. Just because you make every three-pointer that you try to take in a game one time doesn't mean you're a perfect three-point shooter. It means that you had one game where you perfected a weakness. But the question is, can you make that a habit? Can you do that over and over again? And the best chance you have of doing that is to have the mindset that every game you go into, you're going to take this weakness and you're going to make it perfection. And don't be afraid of failure. If you try to go into a game and you try to perfect one of your weaknesses and it just turns out with terrible results, that's perfectly fine. We're not worried about were you perfect or not. We're worried about the effort, the habit. Are you building yourself the habit of effort in order to try to be perfect? That's what we're chasing here. Perfection isn't perfect, guys, but the effort to be perfect can be. You can always try absolutely as hard as you can to take your weakness and then turn it into a strength. I want to thank you guys for watching. Hopefully you enjoyed the idea of trying to be perfect even though it's not really attainable. Just a side note, the reason I'm not recording at the court like normal today is because it's the end of January here in Michigan. It's probably about 34 degrees and there's a kid and his dad over at the court just shooting around, and it's clearly wet and cold outside, but they're out there putting in work. They're not just shooting around, they're actually running drills and trying to get better. I think that it's incredible that even in this kind of weather conditions that you have people putting in that kind of work and actively chasing perfection. Even if that's not specifically their goal, they're trying to better themselves when everyone else is indoors. And I commend them for that. What would also be incredible is if you guys could go ahead and like this video, and don't forget to subscribe to the channel so that you have the easiest access to my other videos about the philosophies of streetball. And the biggest thing you guys can do for me is to share these videos and share the channel. I always make it a point to emphasize this, that we're trying to build a community here and we're trying to get in as many people as possible, because the bigger the community, the more people we have, the bigger discussion we can then have. The bigger our discussion leads to us growing and learning from each other, and that's the whole point. We're trying to learn and get better as fast as we can with as many people as we can. The more people we can have in this community who love streetball, the more we can learn from each other. So please share these videos and please share the channel, guys. I will see you in the next video.
Look, mama, we made it. Your son out in Barbados. Cheese, eggs, and potatoes.